What's going on, guys? Welcome to the video. Seems we got more stories destroying Project Fear and all of the Reaminers' claims that we have been so used to over the last few years regarding Brexit and the disaster they seem to think it would be, or hoped it would be. Because we now have German journalists completely destroying that idea, pointing out the clear and obvious fears over in the EU about us leaving and us surging further ahead of them than we already are. Because as we know, Germany itself is teetering on the edge of a recession. Although actually I think it might have technically entered one, but it's not in a full-blown one yet. Though it is looking likely, as this article will point out. It headlines, "Jar, we Germans are jealous of Brexit." Alexander von Schuenberg says his country fears Britain as they face the reality of a resurgent UK. Something we have all known to be true for a long time, regardless of what the mainstream media have been pumping out over the last few years. Even at events where the champagne flows freely, the mood in the German capital is subdued these days. On Tuesday, I attended one of these glamorous Berlin functions, at which our Chancellor Angela Merkel was awarded the American Academy's Henry Kissinger Prize for her contribution to transatlantic relations. Merkel was lauded for her steadfast leadership, which has provided thoughtful, decent and long government. I suppose that would depend on who you ask. I'm not sure how the German citizens feel about the 1 million odd migrants they now have there that she has just allowed to walk in willy-nilly. But all that praise could not disguise the profound sense of apprehension that hung in the air. She looks well happy, don't she? In Germany, fears are growing that the ship of Europe is sailing troubled waters. Soon, it could be dashed on the rocks. Yeah, well, I expect Germany are really fearing it because they are the EU's bank, especially once we're gone. Take away the 12% of the EU budget that we're covering, and I'm sorry to say, Germany is going to have to pick some of that up, because the rest of the nations are just not economically strong enough to actually do it. Why the anxiety? The looming impact of Brexit. As politicians and policymakers across the continent begin to recognise that Britain's departure represents a daunting challenge to the European project. At times, it feels like cocktail hour aboard the Titanic, with the iceberg looming on the horizon. It wasn't meant to be like this. For years, EU leaders have insisted that Brexit would be a disaster for Britain, leaving your country hopelessly isolated. Yeah, and the fact that they've been insisting it likely means that it was never going to be true. They are a protectionist racket trying to protect their own income at the end of the day, which is us. We are the bank balance of the EU alongside France and Germany. Losing one of them is going to put their budgets right in the shit. And as most of us suspect, will make other countries follow suit and leave the EU behind, consigning it to the dustbin of history where it belongs. According to the relentless propaganda of the pro-EU cause, Europe would forge ahead on the global stage, ever more united, while the UK would slide into insularity and decline. But that narrative is starting to look like a delusion, something we have all been saying for a long time, as have many Brexiteers. Headed by a strong government and sustained by a dynamic economy, it is Britain that can look forward to the future with confidence, while the EU and its member states remain trapped in bureaucratic sclerosis, obsessed with regulation and welfare, when much of the rest of the world is embracing commercial freedom. This week, your government's Brexit bill finally completed its passage through Westminster, despite some last-ditch and futile skirmishing by Remainers in the House of Lords, something we laughed at in my live stream the other day. After all the long years of parliamentary stalemate, Britain's withdrawal from the EU will become a reality next week. The alarmists of Project Fear predicted that this moment would be the cue for economic meltdown. Yet, just the opposite is happening. Britain seems ready to prosper. And it is, like I've said, something we've been saying for a long time now. Only on Thursday, an authoritative study by the Confederation of British Industry, or the CBI, reported the biggest surge in confidence on record among manufacturers, with companies planning to ramp up investment. So clearly not the complete disaster Brexit was supposed to be. The CBI's report followed news earlier in the week of yet another fall in unemployment as the British jobs miracle continues. The jobless rate in the UK is at its lowest since 1974, while employment at 33 million is at its highest ever level. You know, the downsides to Brexit, I suppose. Well, it would be the downsides to Labour because, of course, they want more people on benefits and reliant on the state. So I suppose it depends who you ask as to whether that's a good thing. Most of the country think people being employed is a good thing. Labour think it's terrible because, as we all know, they want you reliant on handouts from them. Particularly striking is the dramatic growth in self-employment to more than 5 million, a sure indicator of an enterprising economy. The welcome jobs news comes against a backdrop of a rising pound, wildly available affordable credit, a resurgence in the property market, and a significant fall in government borrowing. Yeah, because we didn't end up with Jeremy Corbyn borrowing a couple of trillion. And to be honest, Boris Johnson, for a Conservative, is still going to borrow a bit more than we would be used to. But it's nothing in comparison to Labour, so I'm not really complaining about it too much. Especially given the prosperity that we could see outside of the EU could well offset any borrowing that Boris does. Britain looks like it can manage well without the EU. But can the EU manage without Britain? No, it cannot. Your economy is bigger than the 18 smallest EU countries combined. That means, in economic terms, that the EU will not just lose one member state, but shrink from 28 members to 10. Yes, economically, it's going to be in the shit, as I've said already, and it would seem Merkel and Macron already know. Probably why they are so desperate to get rights to our fishing and other things in the deal that they reckon can't be done. It does make you laugh when the EU talk about getting this and that, yet they still claim the deal can't be done. It either can't be done and you can't get nothing, or you want this and that and you know it can be done. Make your mind up, you worthless shitweasels. On a purely fiscal level, the loss of Britain's contribution will have huge implications for the EU budget, as I said earlier. And on a much deeper level, Europe will also badly feel the loss of the Anglo-Saxon pro-market business model, when so many EU governments are addicted to a quasi-socialist, big state, heavily interventionist approach. You know, the Corbyn approach. It is telling that in this age of online technology, Europe's most significant achievement has not been to create a new web giant to rival Amazon or Google, but to use its clout to introduce tougher controls on email traffic through more regulation. And something else that's relating to this is, of course, Article 13. That is going to be passed in the EU, the Copyright Directive. That was reported yesterday. The UK is not going to be a part of. So the memes in the UK will live on, it seems, without any Article 13 nonsense. It is remarkable that EU member states account for only 7% of the world's population, but 50% of all welfare spending. Yes, because they need the people reliant on them to keep them in power. Otherwise, people would tear down the walls of that undemocratic shithole. The truth is that Brexit, so often sneered at by the Federalists, has shone a harsh spotlight on Europe's deep-seated structural problems. Here in Germany, our economy has long hovered on the brink of recession, with growth at its most anemic for a decade, something I alluded to earlier. Manufacturing is looking increasingly outdated as exports and capital investments suffer. Our car industry, the backbone of our economy, now faces perhaps its biggest crisis since Gottlieb Daimler and Carl Benz invented the automobile in the 1880s. Yet, in the face of this darkening picture, Merkel, now in the last full year of her tenure, seems astonishingly complacent and impotent. Yeah, well, as you said, she's in the last year of her tenure. Why should she care? Like the UK, she's off. At the champagne reception in Berlin, she boasted of her achievements, then went on to do something most unusual for a Western politician. She quoted the Russian revolutionary Lenin, who referred to the political principle of one step forward, two steps back. No one seemed surprised that Merkel uttered the name of this mass-murdering communist in front of an august group of US academics. No, because they're all crazy communist fuckpigs anyway, so I suppose they're right at home with what she's saying there. Meanwhile, the difficulties of other European countries are even worse. Next door in France, President Emmanuel Macron is fighting a losing war in his attempt to reform the vast and creaking state. especially its array of unaffordable pension schemes. And all this here is just talking about the lazy bureaucracy in France and Spain, which we're not going to go over. We're just looking for stuff about Britain. A glance across the channel to Britain is enough to make me sufficiently envious to reach for an aspirin, invented a long time in Germany to quaff with the champagne. I see a government with a solid one-party majority compared to all the fragile coalitions of Europe. I see a nation with a strong sense of purpose, built on trust in its own capabilities and a powerful economy. Indeed, according to the International Monetary Fund, Britain will be the fastest growing G7 economy in Europe over the next 2 years. I see a vibrant, open place that can attract huge amounts of foreign investment as it does, has an unrivaled record on business startups, and is a global pioneer of scientific and genetic research. It's not called Great Britain for nothing, remember guys. We are literally the top dog in the majority of fields. At times, when I consider Britain, I am reminded of the bullish atmosphere that prevails in the fast-growing Asian economies, which is something we're clearly trying to do. We're trying to be more like China and America and push ourselves forwards, rather than the EU holding us back like they do to every other member state. It is all a graphic contrast to the sluggishness of Europe. When it comes to football, all the best talent is rushing to England, where the Premier League is the most attractive in the world. Well, I have to agree with that, it certainly is. I am a big fan myself of the Premier League and UK sport. While Britain is going through an astonishing cultural renaissance, reflected in the huge popularity of your entertainment industry, and the expansion of a major art galleries like London's Tate Modern. In Germany, a new socialist law on national heritage is so heavy-handed on transactions of valuable art and antiques, it is effectively killing the market. Well, that's what socialist shit generally does. It kills any market you might have. The most interesting person I spoke to at the award ceremony in Berlin was Andrew Gundlach, scion of one of Germany's most famous banking families, the Arnolds, and now president and co-CEO of Bleichrauder LLC. He is a shrewd man with a deep understanding of the geopolitical scene. Did he think the outlook is grim for post-Brexit Britain? He laughed at the question, as anyone with half a brain cell it was obviously going to do. The whole point of Brexit was to align with the high growth of America and China, not the low growth of Europe, he said, which is something I said earlier on also. What sends cold sweats running down the spine of European policymakers, he added, is a vibrant, talented, attracting economy right on Europe's doorstep, with rulebooks more liberal than the EU's. The last time I visited Britain to gauge the spirit of your country for my newspaper, BILD, I travelled north to Teesside. To my surprise, I found local politicians and businessmen talking of low tax free ports and new opportunities. People in pubs ridiculing the doomsayers in the south. Decades of EU membership had seemingly done little for prosperity there. Something that we've all known for a long time, but it's good of him to actually go to somewhere outside of London. More than one person told me that things might well get better once we're out, and they could well be right. Europe fears a truly global Britain. Die-hard Remainers still cling to the belief that Britain will stumble, that the forthcoming negotiations on a trade deal will prove tortuous. Yeah, but that's not going to help them, because we'll just leave with no deal. We don't care. Boris knows that's what he's got to do if he cannot get his deal done. Simple as that. I am not so sure. With only 10 months of talk left, Britain is in a far better position than most here on the continent dare to admit. In Boris Johnson, you have a charismatic, election-winning Prime Minister who has forced Brexit through, partly thanks to the sheer force of his personality and his ability to outmaneuver his opponents. Let's not forget the help the Brexit Party put in there. I think this guy is clearly missing that out, because the Brexit Party did help a lot. They got rid of Theresa May and forced Boris Johnson and the Conservative Party to go down the hardline Brexit stance of it must get done. Simple as that. We must never forget that fact. It seems he either doesn't know that since he's not from the UK, or he's purposely omitting it, one or the other. In the process, he has repeatedly defied his critics, yes he has. They said he would never persuade the EU to reopen the withdrawal agreement, drop the Irish backstop or reach a new deal. He achieved all three in some sense of the word, and I believe he can do so again with a trade accord. Yes, he possibly can, But once again, I would say that depends on how hardline he is going to be during those talks. Hopefully, very hardline. The eminent historian Niall Ferguson recently said, "I think Brussels has not really adjusted to the new situation, but they will adjust when they realise that Britain isn't about to be rolled over the way it was because of the way May was negotiating. We will see a very different tone to these negotiations, and let's hope we do, as I've said. Your future looks bright. I'm not so sure about mine." Alexander von Schoenberg is editor-at-large of BILD, Germany's biggest selling paper. So, even the German journalist guys are saying what we have been saying for many years, and it seems the bureaucrats and shitweasels over in the EU are quaking in their boots at the possibility of a resurgent UK pushing ahead and becoming a world powerhouse. I can't wait. Only 6 more days to go until we're bathing in Ramona tears, guys. Get ready for the celebrations. But on that note, I am going to end the video there. It's gone on for a bit longer than I thought it was going to, but I thought this article was an important one to cover. As some of you will know, I have started doing live streams and uploading gaming content on my second channel. If you are interested in joining me for a chat in real time during one of my live streams, have an interest in gaming related content on YouTube, or simply want to follow me over there because you are a legend, the link to subscribe will be down in the video description and as a pinned comment. I hope to see you all there. Now, as always, I want to thank our YouTube, PayPal, Patreon and Subscribe Star members for supporting the channel, along with everyone who watches my videos. Remember to let me know what you guys think down in the comments section below. Leave a like, subscribe with the notification bell and share this video as it helps the channel a lot. And I'll see you all in the next one.
There is a pattern consistent throughout history of oppressed people turning on the oppressors. Slaves against their owners, the peasantry against the feudal barons, colonies, Mr. Verhofstadt, against their empires. And that is why Britain is leaving. And it doesn't matter which language you use, we are going and we are glad to be going. We're off.
Ramon! Ramon!